The restaurant was not fancy, but it was always busy. It sat on a busy street where office workers came after long days, families gathered on weekends, and travelers stopped for warm food and rest. Soft lights hung from the ceiling, and the smell of fresh bread and cooked meat filled the air. In the corner of the room stood an old upright piano. Its surface was scratched, its keys slightly yellow, and most people thought it was only decoration. Very few even noticed it anymore. The waitress moved quickly between tables, carrying plates and refilling glasses. She wore a simple uniform and kept her hair tied back. Her steps were quiet, and she never drew attention to herself. She smiled when customers spoke to her, nodded politely, and moved on. To most people, she was just another worker trying to get through a long shift. That evening had started like any other. The restaurant was full, voices mixed together, and dishes clinked softly. Then the door opened, and a group of well-dressed people walked in. They were loud, confident, and clearly comfortable being noticed. At the center of the group was a rich man who spoke the most. His voice carried across the room without effort. He laughed often, leaned back in his chair once seated, and waved his hand when he ordered, as if everything around him existed to serve him. The waitress was assigned to their table. She approached with a notepad, asked for their order, and listened quietly. The rich man barely looked at her. He talked over her, joked with his friends, and acted as if her presence was part of the furniture. She wrote everything down carefully and walked away. As the night went on, the group grew louder. They talked about business deals, expensive vacations, and restaurants they had visited around the world. The rich man bragged the most. He spoke about money as if it were a game he always won. Other customers noticed, some with interest, some with discomfort. At one point, the rich man leaned back in his chair and looked around the room. His eyes landed on the piano in the corner. He laughed and pointed at it. "Who plays that thing?" he asked loudly. A few people glanced toward the piano. Someone joked that it probably hadn't been touched in years. The rich man smirked and shook his head. "Every good restaurant has music," he said. "But this one looks like it came free with the building." His friends laughed. The sound was sharp and careless. When the waitress returned with drinks, the rich man pointed at the piano again. "Hey," he said, finally looking at her. "Can you play that?" The question caught her off guard. She froze for a moment, then shook her head slightly. "I work here," she said softly. "I serve tables." The rich man raised an eyebrow. A slow smile spread across his face. "So that's a no," he said. "Figures." Some people nearby shifted in their seats. The waitress felt heat rise to her face, but she kept her posture calm. She placed the drinks on the table and turned to leave. "Wait," the rich man called out. She stopped. "I'll make you a deal," he said, louder now so others could hear. "I bet you can't play even one proper song on that piano." The room grew a little quieter. The waitress looked at him, unsure what to say. "I don't play," she replied. "I'm working." The rich man laughed again. "Everyone plays a little," he said. "Or at least pretends to. But you? I can tell just by looking at you. You don't belong at a piano." His words landed harder than he knew. The waitress lowered her eyes. Her hands tightened slightly around the tray she was holding. "I don't want to make a bet," she said. But the rich man was already enjoying the attention. He pulled some money from his wallet and placed it on the table. "This says you can't," he announced. "And if you can, I'll pay you for the show. Fair deal." People began to notice. Some leaned forward. Others whispered. A few took out their phones, curious about what might happen next. The waitress felt her heart beating faster. She glanced toward the manager's desk, then back at the piano. The manager watched from a distance, unsure whether to step in. The restaurant had never been so focused on one moment. "I really shouldn't," she said quietly. "Why?" "Afraid?" the rich man asked, smiling as if it were a joke. She didn't answer. Instead, she picked up the empty glasses and turned away, trying to return to her work. But the feeling stayed with her. The laughter. The looks. The piano sitting silently in the corner. As she walked back to the kitchen, memories she tried to keep buried stirred quietly inside her. Sounds of music from long ago. Evenings filled with practice. Hands resting on keys that once felt like home. She shook her head, pushing the thoughts away. That was a different life, she told herself. A life that no longer fit who she was now. Behind her, the rich man's voice carried through the restaurant once more. "Come on," he said. "Just one song. Or prove me right." The waitress paused at the kitchen door. The noise of the restaurant faded for a brief moment. She took a slow breath, unaware that this single night, which had started so ordinary, was about to change everything. She stood inside the kitchen longer than she needed to. The sounds of the restaurant came through the swinging door in broken pieces. Laughter, plates touching, the rich man's voice rising again. She stared at the metal counter and focused on breathing. In and out, slow and steady. She told herself she was fine. She had dealt with difficult customers before. This was nothing new, but something about this moment felt heavier. The piano, the bet, the way he looked at her like he already knew the outcome. She wiped her hands on her apron and returned to the dining area. Work had to continue. Orders still needed to be served. Tables still needed clearing. Life did not pause just because someone felt small. As she moved from table to table, her eyes avoided the corner where the piano stood. She knew that if she looked too long, memories would come rushing back. Memories she worked hard to keep quiet. Long ago, before uniforms and long shifts, music had filled her days. Not loud music, but gentle sounds that lived in the walls of a small home. An old piano once sat near a window, catching sunlight in the afternoon. Its keys were worn, just like the one in the restaurant. Every note had been learned slowly, carefully, with patience and love. Music was not a hobby back then. It was a language, one that spoke when words were not enough. Those days ended sooner than she expected. Life changed. Money became a problem. Responsibilities replaced dreams. The piano was sold. Lessons stopped. What once felt like a future slowly turned into a memory. She never told anyone about it. There was no reason to. People saw her as she was now, not as she had been. And that was easier. At the rich man's table, the mood stayed playful. His friends enjoyed the attention. One of them laughed and said something about free entertainment. Another raised a glass, already confident the night would end in a joke. The rich man leaned back again, eyes following the waitress as she passed. "She's not coming back," he said. "Smart move." Some nearby diners exchanged looks. A woman at a different table frowned. A man shook his head quietly. Not everyone found the situation funny. The waitress refilled a water glass at a nearby table. Her hands trembled slightly, but she kept her smile polite. A customer noticed and gave her a gentle nod, as if offering silent support. When she returned to the counter, the manager stepped closer. "You okay?" the manager asked quietly. She nodded. "Yes." The manager hesitated. "You don't have to do anything you're not comfortable with." "I know," she replied. And she did know. She could finish her shift, go home, and forget the whole thing. The rich man would leave, feeling proud. Tomorrow would look just like yesterday. But the piano remained. Silent. Waiting. Another customer whispered to a friend, pointing toward the corner. Phones were still out. The restaurant buzzed with quiet expectation. The waitress felt it then. Not fear, but something deeper. A pull. Not toward the rich man or his money, but toward the part of herself she had ignored for years. She remembered sitting on a bench that was too high for her feet to touch the floor. Fingers stretching to reach notes that once seemed impossible. Being told to start slow. To feel the sound. Not rush it. Music had taught her patience. Discipline. Strength. She walked past the piano again, this time closer. The wood looked tired, but familiar. One key was chipped. Another sat slightly lower than the rest. She noticed details others would miss. The rich man noticed her pause. "Well," he asked, "changed your mind?" She didn't answer right away. She looked around the room, at the families, at the couples, at the tired workers eating late meals, at people who came here to relax, not to judge. "I don't play for bets," she said calmly. The rich man shrugged. Then don't play. No harm done. His tone suggested the opposite. Like her walking away would prove his point. She took a breath. If I play, she said slowly, it's not for you. The room went quiet again. The rich man laughed softly. Fine. Play for the room. She nodded once, more to herself than anyone else. Her heart raced as she moved the piano bench back. It made a soft scraping sound against the floor. She sat down carefully, smoothing her apron, placing her hands in her lap. For a moment, she did nothing. She closed her eyes. The noise of the restaurant faded. In its place came something softer, steadier, a memory of how it felt to begin. Her fingers hovered above the keys. This was not about proving anyone wrong. It was about remembering who she was before life got loud. She pressed the first key. The sound was gentle, almost shy. A few people leaned forward. The rich man smirked, unimpressed. She continued. One note led to another. Slowly, carefully, each sound finding its place. The piano responded better than expected. It was out of tune in places, but it held on, just like she had. The room grew quieter with every passing second. Conversation stopped. Forks paused midair. She played the way she always had. Not to impress. Not to rush. But to feel. And for the first time in many years, she allowed herself to remember everything she had almost forgotten. The first notes floated through the restaurant softly, like they were unsure if they were welcome. The sound was not loud or fast. It was calm, steady, and careful. At first, only a few people noticed. A couple near the window stopped talking. Someone near the counter slowly turned their head. The rich man leaned back in his chair, arms crossed, watching with a half smile. He expected the moment to fall apart quickly. A mistake. A pause. An excuse to laugh. His friends waited for it too, already relaxed, confident this would end exactly as they imagined. But the waitress did not stop. Her fingers moved with quiet confidence. Each note followed the next, as if it had been waiting its turn. There was no rush, no showing off, just control and feeling. The piano, old and imperfect, seemed to wake up under her hands. A server passing by slowed their steps. A child at a nearby table leaned closer to the sound. Even the kitchen noise softened, as if the walls themselves were listening. The waitress sat straight, shoulders relaxed. Her face was calm, but inside, everything stirred. Memories moved through her like a slow river. Long evenings of practice. Correcting mistakes. Learning to listen instead of force the sound. She did not look at the rich man. She did not look at anyone. Her focus stayed on the keys and the feeling beneath her fingers. The melody grew stronger. Still gentle, but deeper now. It carried emotion that did not need explanation. People felt it without knowing why. A woman wiped her eyes quietly. A man lowered his phone, forgetting he had been recording. The room continued to grow still. The rich man's smile faded slightly. He leaned forward, confused. This was not what he expected. This was not someone guessing their way through a tune. One of his friends shifted in their seat. She's not bad, they said, unsure. The rich man said nothing. The waitress moved into the next part of the piece. The notes climbed higher, then settled again like breathing. It felt personal, honest, as if the piano was speaking for her. She remembered why she loved music, because it listened back. Someone near the entrance whispered, "Who is she?" No one answered. The manager stood frozen near the counter, hands clasped together. They had never heard the piano sound like this before. It had always been background, decoration. Now it felt alive. The rich man cleared his throat and sat upright. The room no longer belonged to him. His voice, his laughter, his money, none of it mattered right now. The waitress reached a moment where the melody slowed again. She hesitated for a fraction of a second, then continued. That pause held more power than noise ever could. People leaned in. Her hands moved with ease, even on keys that resisted slightly. She adjusted without thinking. Years of practice guided her fingers where thought could not. The piano gave a soft hum, almost warm. A customer whispered, "This feels like a story."
It did.
A story without words. About loss. About endurance. About holding on to something even when life tried to take it away. The rich man looked around. Faces that once laughed with him now stared at the piano. He felt something unfamiliar tighten in his chest. Embarrassment.
Doubt.
He reached for his glass but stopped halfway, listening. The waitress's foot pressed the pedal gently. The sound deepened, filling the room. The music was no longer shy. It stood confidently in the space, asking to be heard. Outside, traffic passed. Inside, time slowed. A server near the back held a tray midair, completely still. No one complained. No one moved. The waitress's breathing stayed steady. Her hands felt light.
Free.
She was no longer thinking about the bet, or the rich man, or the crowd. She was home. The melody reached a turning point. Notes fell like quiet rain, then rose again with strength. The emotion surprised even her. She swallowed, eyes still closed, and let the music carry her forward. A deep silence followed one sustained note. It hung in the air, delicate and full. Then she continued. The rich man's confidence had fully disappeared now. He shifted in his chair, uncomfortable. This was not entertainment. This was something else. Something he did not control. He looked at the money on the table. It suddenly felt small. As the music moved toward its end, the room felt different.
Softer.
Closer. Strangers shared the same quiet breath. The waitress slowed her hands. Each note landed gently, as if saying goodbye. The final sound faded. For a moment, no one reacted. No clapping. No talking. Just silence. The kind that follows something real. The waitress lowered her hands and opened her eyes. She stayed seated, unsure what came next. Her heart pounded, but not from fear. From release. Then someone stood up. Then another. The sound of applause filled the room, growing louder with every second. People clapped with their hands, their faces, their hearts. Some smiled through tears. Others shook their heads in disbelief. The waitress stood slowly.
She did not bow.
She simply nodded once, overwhelmed. The rich man remained seated, clapping last. His face showed something new. Not anger. Not pride.
Shock.
And for the first time that night, he looked at her not as a waitress, but as someone he had completely misjudged. The applause did not fade quickly. It rolled through the restaurant like a wave, strong and steady. Hands clapped until palms felt warm. Some people stood. Others remained seated, but clapped just as hard. The sound filled every corner of the room, replacing the silence that had held everyone moments before. The waitress stood beside the piano, unsure where to place her hands. She felt exposed, like a light had suddenly turned on inside her. Her face felt warm. Her chest felt tight. She nodded again, quietly, as if that was the only response she knew how to give. Someone near the front said, "That was beautiful." Another voice followed, "I haven't felt music like that in years." The words reached her slowly, as if traveling through water. She wasn't sure how to accept them. Praise felt unfamiliar. She had lived for a long time without it. The manager approached carefully, clapping with a soft smile. "I had no idea," the manager said. The waitress gave a small shrug. "Most people don't." The rich man finally stood up. The room quieted again, though not completely. All eyes moved to him now. He adjusted his jacket, cleared his throat, and looked at the waitress. For a moment, it seemed like he might laugh it off. Make another joke. Turn it into something casual. But he didn't. "You surprised everyone," he said, his voice lower than before. She met his eyes calmly. "I didn't come here to surprise anyone." There was a pause. Not uncomfortable, but honest. The rich man nodded slowly. "Still," he said, "you proved me wrong." He reached for the money on the table and held it out. "A bet is a bet." She looked at the cash, then back at him. "Keep it," she said. That response caused another quiet reaction from the room. A few people murmured in surprise. "I didn't play for money," she added. "I played because I needed to." The rich man hesitated, then placed the money back down. He seemed smaller now, less sure of himself. Then let me at least apologize, he said. I judged you. She nodded once.
Yes.
You did. No anger. No raised voice. Just truth. The tension broke when a customer laughed softly, not in mockery, but in relief. The room relaxed. Conversations began again, but they were different now. Quieter. More thoughtful. A couple approached the piano and thanked her personally. A parent whispered that their child had been watching in awe. Another person asked where she learned to play. She answered simply, a long time ago. When things settled, she returned to work. Plates still needed to be cleared. Orders still needed to be taken. Life did not suddenly change shape just because of one moment, but something inside her had shifted. As she walked between tables, people smiled at her differently now. Not as someone invisible, not just as a server, but as someone they had shared something real with. The rich man and his group stayed quieter. They spoke less loudly. Their laughter was softer. When they ordered dessert, he spoke directly to her, politely. Thank you, he said when she brought the plates. She nodded. You're welcome. Later, as the evening slowed, the manager stopped her near the counter. You know, the manager said, you don't have to hide that talent. She smiled faintly. I wasn't hiding. I was surviving. The manager seemed to understand. Near closing time, the restaurant emptied. Chairs were stacked. Tables wiped down. The piano sat quietly again, but it no longer felt forgotten. The waitress passed it once more, her fingers brushing the edge of the wood.
She did not sit down this time. She didn't need to.
The music had already said what it needed to say. As she stepped outside into the cool night air, the city felt a little different. Not louder, not brighter, just lighter. She walked home knowing one thing clearly. That night had not been about a bet. It had been about being seen. The next morning felt quieter than usual. The waitress woke up before her alarm, staring at the ceiling for a long moment. Her body felt tired, but her mind was awake. The sounds of the piano still echoed gently inside her, like a memory that refused to fade. She got ready for work the same way she always did. Simple clothes. Hair tied back. Nothing about her routine changed. Yet something felt different beneath the surface, like the ground had shifted slightly overnight. As she walked through the streets toward the restaurant, she noticed small details she usually ignored. Morning light on windows. A busker playing softly at a corner. People moving with purpose. The world felt more open somehow. When she reached the restaurant, the door was already unlocked. Inside, the manager stood near the counter, holding a phone. You're early, the manager said, then smiled. Actually, I'm glad you are. The waitress hung her jacket. Is something wrong? No, the manager said. Something unexpected. The manager turned the phone toward her. On the screen was a short video. She recognized the angle immediately. Someone had recorded her performance. It's been shared a lot since last night, the manager said carefully. People keep calling, asking about you. Her stomach tightened. Calling for what?
Some just want to say, thank you.
Others want to know if you play anywhere else. She shook her head. I don't. I know, the manager replied. But they don't. She felt overwhelmed, but not excited. Attention made her uneasy. Music had always been personal, private, never something meant for crowds. Throughout the day, customers treated her differently. Some smiled knowingly. A few mentioned the video. Others simply thanked her for the service and left generous tips. One older customer stopped her near the piano. Music like that doesn't disappear, they said kindly. It waits. She nodded, unsure what to say. During her break, she sat alone near the back, scrolling briefly through her phone. Messages from strangers filled the screen. Words of encouragement, gratitude, curiosity. She locked the phone and placed it face down. Too much. Too fast. That evening, after her shift, she stayed behind while the lights dimmed. The restaurant was empty, quiet in a different way than before. She sat at the piano again, this time alone. No audience. No pressure. She played softly, just enough to hear herself. The notes came easily, like they had been waiting all day. She realized then that the music had not only changed how others saw her, it had changed how she saw herself. She had spent years believing that part of her life was over, that music belonged to the past, to another version of herself she could no longer afford to be. But the truth was simpler. She had never stopped being who she was. The next few days passed quietly, but the feeling stayed. Each time she passed the piano, she felt a pull. Not strong, just present. One afternoon, the rich man returned. This time he came alone. The restaurant was calm. Only a few tables were filled. He sat near the corner, not in the center. When she approached, he looked up and spoke softly. "I didn't come to make a scene," he said. "I wanted to thank you. Properly." She listened without interrupting. "I've been thinking about that night," he continued. "About how easily I judged you. I don't want to be that person." She considered his words, then nodded. "Most people don't mean to be." He smiled faintly. "Still, I was." He left after finishing his meal, tipping generously, but that was not what stayed with her. What stayed was the look in his eyes. Reflection. Later that week, the manager approached her again. "There's a small event coming up," the manager said. "Nothing big, just regulars. They asked if you'd be willing to play." The waitress felt her breath catch. She didn't answer right away. That night, she walked home slowly. The city hummed around her. She thought about the past, the present, the quiet future waiting ahead. She stopped near a shop window where a small keyboard sat on display. Nothing fancy, but real. She smiled to herself. Maybe life wasn't asking her to choose between survival and music anymore. Maybe it was offering space for both. She kept walking, knowing that whatever came next would be on her terms. The music had opened a door. She was just beginning to decide how far she wanted to step through it. The small event arrived without much announcement. No posters on the windows. No loud promotion. Just a quiet agreement between the manager and a handful of regular customers who loved the restaurant for what it was. The waitress worked her shift as usual that day. She moved between tables, took orders, smiled politely, and kept her thoughts to herself. But every time she passed the piano, her chest tightened just a little. Not from fear, from awareness. When the last dinner plates were cleared and the lights were lowered slightly, the manager gave her a gentle nod. The room held maybe 20 people. Familiar faces. Calm voices. No phones raised high. No pressure. She washed her hands, took a slow breath, and walked toward the piano. This time, no one challenged her. No one laughed. No one placed money on a table. She sat down, adjusted the bench, and rested her hands on her lap. The room waited. She began with a simple melody, one she knew well. The notes were soft, steady, and welcoming. The piano still had its flaws, but she understood them now. She worked with the sound instead of against it. People listen the way people do, when they trust what they are hearing. Not tense, not curious, just present. She played another piece, then another. Between songs, she spoke briefly, not to explain herself, just to thank them for listening. When she finished, the applause felt different than before. Quieter, warmer, like something shared instead of something earned. Afterward, a few people stayed to talk. Someone asked if she would ever play again. Another mentioned a community space nearby that hosted music nights. No promises were made. No plans rushed. She liked it that way. Over the following weeks, life settled into a new rhythm. She continued working at the restaurant. She continued paying bills. Nothing magical changed overnight. But she also began to practice again. At home, she cleared a small space near the window. She bought a modest keyboard, the kind meant for learning, not performing. It fit perfectly. Every evening after work, she played for herself. Some nights, the music came easily. Other nights, it didn't. She accepted both. She learned something important during that time. Music didn't demand sacrifice the way it once had. It didn't ask her to choose between who she was and how she lived. It simply asked her to show up. One afternoon, The restaurant door opened, and the rich man stepped inside again. This time, he didn't draw attention. He ordered a simple meal and sat quietly. When he left, he paused near the counter. "I hear you play here sometimes now," he said. "Sometimes," she replied. "I'm glad," he said. "People should hear it." She smiled politely. "People do." He nodded, understanding that the conversation had reached its end. As months passed, the piano became part of the restaurant again. Not a decoration, not a challenge, a presence. She played on quiet nights. Sometimes once a week. Sometimes less. Always on her terms. Customers came and went. Some recognized her. Others didn't. That was fine. What mattered was that she no longer felt invisible. Not to others. Not to herself. One evening, after closing, she sat alone at the piano and played the same melody that had started everything. It sounded different now. Softer in some places. Stronger in others. She realized that the music hadn't changed. She had. She stood, turned off the lights, and locked the door behind her. Outside, the street hummed gently. Life moved forward just as it always had. But she walked with a lighter step. Not because someone had been proven wrong, but because she had finally allowed herself to be right about who she was. The piano remained inside the restaurant, waiting quietly. And whenever she chose to sit down and play, it would be ready. Just like her.